The slow death of the Big Four, coming up on this week's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 25th of June 2026. I'm Elisa Barwick and joining me today is Citizens Party researcher and writer Richard Barden. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Elisa. And also on today's show, timeline shows Dan Duggan was a pawn in AUKUS deal and Wilkie warns against ASIO overreach.
Yes, so some hot topics today. Stay tuned for all of them. And to help us circulate the show, you can, of course, hit the like button, make a comment below, and we try to weigh in as much as we can. And you, of course, if you're not already a subscriber and you're watching this on YouTube, and hello to all the Channel 31 viewers, all 4 of you. But if you're watching on YouTube, you will find links below, of course, for all the information background. And also you can hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and you'll get all the updates. Okay, first topic, the slow death of the Big Four. Now, we are talking today about the slow death of the Big Four auditors / consultants, being Deloitte, PwC, EY and KPMG, not the Big Four banks, but it does have links and implications.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. These are the auditors and everything else, and they audit all the big corporations, not just here, but all around the world. I forget the numbers, but it's something like 80% of all the
we'll come to that
listed corporations.
Shortly.
So definitely involves the banks.
Yeah, and we're talking really in broader terms too about the corporate control as a whole over governments. So that's going to be a major theme as we go through the details that we're going to draw upon, because in terms of Australian politics and everything that's shifting and everything that's going on, any party that's not addressing, dislodging that corporate control over Australian politics, whether it be through the funding of political parties or whether it be through the influencing of policy, which these 4 big consultants play a big role in, as we'll show, then they're not addressing and tackling the real issues that will be the only way to make lasting change across the political spectrum in Australia. So we're going to talk specifically about the inquiries that have been going on into the Big Four consultants. So there were 2 inquiries that ran simultaneously into PwC in the last couple of years. And now there's an ongoing inquiry on KPMG. And it just seems that our politicians are not learning any of the lessons because, of course, there's been, and we'll mention one later, previous inquiries about exactly the same subject. And this is the history that we seem to see in the Australian Parliament, is that we keep revisiting these issues. The recommendations by many such inquiries are excellent. The government just kind of, they ignore it as much as they can. Eventually they often come back and rubber stamp things, but nothing happens. And it's only the power of the people that's going to change that, as we've seen where we've been successful in defeating legislation of various kinds, to really give the politicians a hard time over these issues such they cannot ignore it any longer. So I want to start this segment and then I'll get your commentary, Richard, because you've written about this for the Australian Alert this week. But I want to start with a couple of videos that give you a bit of the flavour of this ongoing inquiry into KPMG. So the first of these is a report on it from ABC, and just note that they refer to you'll see one of the people on the stand being interviewed from CANZ, C-A-A-N-Z. That's the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, and it's the peak body for the accounting profession.
Yeah, and you'll also see in that first clip that one of the witnesses actually recites the words of the KPMG whistleblower. This is the guy who exposed the allegations against KPMG, which triggered this inquiry. And the second clip is from ABC Business, where you'll hear from a KC, Anthony Wheely, on the incredible conflict of interest that goes on with these Big Four consultants, particularly given the fact that they receive billions of dollars of government contracts for consulting work. So we'll run those clips.
Mr Shepherd, you must think we are really stupid.
It's outrageous.
I don't see myself as a bad apple, nor do I see the firm to be full of bad apples.
KPMG is under fire for taking confidential information from Lendlease, a client of nearly 70 years, to try and win contracts at other businesses.
It's extremely serious conduct and I'm disgusted by it. It's basic 101 stuff.
I mean, ultimately, our auditors, we do need to provide them with access to all of our books and records. In terms of the use of the information, I mean, ultimately, they should not be sharing that with any third parties without talking to Lendlease. Trust is crucial.
Earlier this year, a senior auditor blew the whistle on the firm. Today, their words read out by former executives.
What lengths the business is prepared to go to achieve growth and profit. The lack of speak-up culture, the culture of fear, retribution and revenue growth at all costs is not acceptable. It is KPMG's toxic culture.
They've been caught out over a number of issues. One is their treatment of whistleblowers. Two is the actual conflict of interest, a massive conflict of interest that arises when doing audit work. They're able to seize valuable material that helps them move in on another client and gain a contract that way. I mean, that is just shocking behaviour, and it seems to be undoubtedly the truth.
Well, I'm sure you've heard a lot of flawed internal investigations or dealt with a lot of whistleblowers yourself. How does this professional drama compare in terms of its severity?
Well, I think it's much worse because, you know, we're dealing with one of the most respected of the Big Four firms, and the Big Four firms as a whole are the most respected audit and traditional accounting establishments in Australia. So it's at a very high level. And the real problem is that they're not, I mean, the majority of their work is in consulting, government work, worth millions of dollars, which has got nothing or very little to do with traditional accounting at all. So, you know, that's an enormous conflict in itself, and it's been demonstrated in Pricewaterhouse, PwC's problems where they've used confidential tax information from the government to advise their clients on how to avoid tax. Here it emerges again with just as disgusting behaviour from a commercial and ethical point of view.
Okay, now that first ABC report referenced the fact that, giving the background of the story, that KPMG had looked at the books when they were doing the auditing of Lendlease to give vital information to win contracts to, you know, build themselves into the dominant of these auditors and consultants. But it wasn't just Lendlease. There was a whole bunch of companies they did this with, right? Yeah, well, so they've... And what that information is exactly is not public, so we don't know exactly how they used it to gain these advantages, but it obviously worked because, yeah, they used confidential information from Lendlease and apparently Telstra to win audits with auditing contracts with these other companies, Dexus, Optus, and they've been grabbing documents and improperly sharing documents internally, apparently with documents from all of these companies. As they get more contracts, they just keep doing this. Yeah, right? And some of the banks, Westpac and Macquarie Bank, you mentioned. Yeah, and then talking about the links with banks, there are ex-KPMG people in board and executive roles in banks and vice versa. It's the revolving door thing, right? Yeah, that overlap. In the public service, even Parliament, there's a lot of members of Parliament who have previously worked for KPMG or PwC or whoever, right? And in the inquiry that's going on right now, and this was, I believe, commenced because the whistleblower had gone through all the processes internally at KPMG and, you know, got no traction whatsoever. So he went to the Senator, Deborah O'Neill, Labor Senator, with that information. Yeah, this is which she revealed under parliamentary privilege.
Yeah. Again, we don't know what, because the Senate, the Parliament, is very careful about
Yes.
not blowing people's cover. You know, like journalists, you don't reveal your sources and all of that. So, and they haven't published. They've got this confidential information, but they're not releasing that because it belongs to the companies. This is stuff that KPMG accessed as a trusted auditor. If you're auditing somebody, you need full access to all their books so that you can sign off that they've been doing business legitimately. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
But it's one of those questions: who polices the police?
Exactly.
And so, there are supposed to be whistleblower processes. Now, they don't have all the same whistleblower protections, although not that the system works very well because it's not designed to, for listed corporations, public corporations, but some of those apply to whistleblowers universally, at least in theory. But what KPMG has been caught doing, and so the whistleblower reports this misconduct in 2024, March of 2024. It gets ignored. The executives, they have these nominal executive roles, but it's a partnership structure because that avoids scrutiny by the regulators, ASIC, as we've talked about before. And so then they just lie to everyone. They tell the whistleblower that, they later say, we did this internal investigation and found nothing wrong. But as he pointed out in his submission to the parliamentary inquiry, the Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services, that was the first he ever heard of it. Was when they started telling Parliament we did an internal investigation. He said, "Well, I raised the issues and these investigators never even spoke to me. This is the first I've heard of it." What they did do, which has come out in this inquiry, is they immediately started spying on him through his work laptop.
Yeah.
And they lied to their own independent directors, because there's sort of a board, an oversight board that they're non-executive independent directors, external directors. Didn't used to be. This was foisted on them after previous scandals, right? They lied to them that this law firm had done an investigation, had reviewed, done its own investigation, confirming the findings of this internal investigation firm called Ashurst, who later told Parliament, look, we advised them on employment matters related to the whistleblowing, but we did no investigation. We weren't commissioned to do one, we didn't do one. But they lie to their own directors that that's happening, who aren't partners, so that one of them then goes on to inadvertently lie to the whistleblower that his concerns are being addressed. They string him along for 2 years. Eventually, the independent directors say, "No, we need a proper investigation of this." So they hire a law firm to do it. It's not legal work. They hire law firms so they can hide behind legal professional privilege.
Right.
The law firm finds that substantiates at least some of what the whistleblower had complained about. But it's privileged. The lawyers can't talk about it without permission. So then they just lie to everybody that still found nothing wrong.
So this was the basis then, prior to last Friday's hearing, which we were just talking about, that KPMG basically instructed their lawyers not to cooperate
with the parliamentary
inquiry, and basically tried to hide behind that privilege, lawyers' privilege, to not even hand in the documentation that was requested of them by the inquiry.
Basically just bury everything and say it's all confidential, it's all privileged, except legal professional privilege does not apply to the Parliament.
Yeah.
Right? Just like defamation doesn't apply. If you air, which is what the whistleblower, after he got the runaround again in March this year, then he said, okay, and just sent it to Senator O'Neill so that she could air this complaint under parliamentary privilege. And so, now it all comes out. And if they'd had any brains, as I said in the article, if they had any brains, they would have just gone, okay, we need to just
cut our
mea
losses.
culpa and just throw yourself on the mercy of the court. But no, they tried to brazen it out. They tried to cover it up. It was never going to work. PwC tried it. It didn't work for them. 3 years earlier, 2 years earlier in the inquiries, that the same committee, the same people, Deborah O'Neill, Barbara Pocock, they did all this, and now they're having to do it all again because the government didn't do anything about it.
Because the government ended up agreeing with quite a few of the PwC recommendations from the previous inquiry, and yet nothing was done.
The first inquiry, there were two inquiries, one by the Senate Committee on public administration, and I forget the exact term, and then the other one by this Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services. It was the bigger one. They completely ignored it. We noted these recommendations. Noted, not agreed, not disagreed, not said they would implement, and they didn't implement anything. They agreed in part or in principle with 8 of the 12. So there were 40 recommendations from the bigger second inquiry. Some of the same senators involved in both. The first inquiry made 12 recommendations. They said they agreed in part or in principle with 8 of the 12 and noted the others. And then they did nothing. Just a few little fiddles here and there that they'd done in the meantime to pretend to be doing something. And then they said, oh, well, that'll do.
Yeah. And that's why we're facing this KPMG scandal now, because they didn't deal with it when they could have.
Yeah, well, the big one being whistleblower protections.
And just to note, because it's interesting to see even the language, when KPMG tried to say, we're not cooperating, we're not going to hand over these documents, Senate Clerk Richard Pye told them, look, the Senate has the authority to imprison anyone found to be in contempt or issue fines, and that legal professional privilege does not affect the inquiry powers of Commonwealth parliamentary committees and does not provide a basis for resisting a lawful order of the committee. So they did eventually back down, and those documents have been handed in. And Barbara O'Neill told the media that the committee will now process those documents and others yet to arrive in the usual way with care and caution to ensure they are given proper consideration in accordance with the long-standing practice of the Senate. So it should be rather interesting because, you know, she's a bulldog on this matter, as is Barbara Pocock, and there's no doubt going to be a lot of digging into those documents and what they reveal.
But again, you have to wonder, like, what did they think would happen? Right? And it occurred to me that there's this infamous book that was made into a stupid movie called Atlas Shrugged about this ideal of, it's this old thing that I know you've written all about, goes back to the roots of classic British liberalism, the idea that public, the aggregate of private vices will somehow add up to the public benefit, right?
That's right.
And then Ayn Rand writes this
literally
stupid
the philosophy.
novel, the selfish individual leading society forward. No, what you get is this, overgrown adolescents who think the world exists to serve them and rules are for other people.
Yeah, and these CEOs of such companies, they literally think they're untouchable because that's their philosophy, right? They're better than everyone else and they only have to go ahead and do anything that, you know, contents them to generate the greater good.
Well, and the problem is that belief has been validated over and over again because no matter how many times they get caught with their finger in the pie and their thumb in the scales and whatever, they just get off with a slap with a wet lettuce. PwC got caught illegally using government information. It was advising the government on tax laws that it then influenced the structure of those laws and used the inside information about them so that it could tell its international clients how to circumvent them the instant they came into effect. And one guy got banned from the guy who actually grabbed stole that documentation is the only person who suffered any long-term consequences out of this. And even he didn't go to jail. He should have. And again, the government bans them from and they've done the same thing with KPMG. They said, we'll ban you from new government work for 3 months. Well, they've got ongoing contracts.
Exactly.
Which, you know, really, and mention in there, you know, it's a 3-month ban. They did that with PwC and then they ignored the report that they're supposed to respond to within 90 days, just like the bank closures inquiry. Governments are supposed to, by law, supposedly required to respond to these things within 90 days.
Yeah.
The trouble is there's no penalty for breaching that law, so they do it all the time.
Yeah.
They let this thing drag out for over a year and then said, oh, well, we've done enough now anyway, so don't worry about it.
And who was it that, I think, because you were saying the other day about, I think it was KPMG, they had to impose internal fines, but then they revised them all downwards, so they ended up being like a rounding error in terms of the annual salary packets of these CEOs.
So when they eventually decided that somebody needed to be, held to some sort of account for this, even if just for the sake of appearances, and whichever internal, disciplinary process recommend these fines, clawbacks of bonus, however it works, of $78,000, and the CEO, who's now been sacked, resigned, he got sacked. But he has discretion over that, and he just wound them all back down to like 20,000 instead. And now all of the partners are going to get their pay cut, all of them, all 700 of them, by up to 30%, when none of them were responsible. It was the top brass who was responsible. A lot of them have gone, even the ones who have quit now, been forced out over this. As you say, it's a rounding error. They're just, and now the everyone else who are just, these things are structured as partnerships to avoid scrutiny, like I said. A lot of these people who are partners, they might work their way up the ladder eventually, but they're employees with a partnership thing by their name that, so that they can, it's like having a security clearance, right? You can't talk about this, you don't have to talk about this and this and this if you're a partner. You can claim all these privileges and hide all these,
Yeah. So for regular viewers, you won't be surprised that we've pushed to change this model of the big consultants and auditors for a long time, particularly since 2019. And that includes breaking them up because you've got numerous functions under one roof, from accounting to auditing to consulting and government advisory services. You've got, as you mentioned, the opaque partnership structures. And here are the figures you alluded to earlier. And these are figures from 2019, so it could even be worse than this. Well, we published them in 2019. So the Big Four audit 97% of US public companies, 98% of Australia's, all of the UK's top 100 companies, and 80% of Japanese listed companies. Their dominance is entrenched all the more because only the Big Four are big enough to audit the largest multinational companies. You can't have a little auditor down the street, that can come in and do that.
Having branches in each of the countries that these companies also operate in, so you can have the one company do the whole audit.
Yeah. And furthermore, no one audits, as you alluded to, the auditors, and there's very little oversight from elected government. And as one of our collaborators that we've worked with on fighting this scourge, Professor Prem Sikka, who's a retired accounting professor in the United Kingdom, and calls himself an activist accountant because he's really taken this on over many decades. He talks about how these big firms, the biggest firms in the world, have colonised the state. And that's thanks to the free market because, we stripped all our regulations and so forth. And so public functions and even government itself has ended up being outsourced.
Yeah, and these companies, or there used to be a big eight, and then they amalgamated and various things,
Concentrated.
And then Arthur Andersen was the one that blew up along with its corrupt client Enron back whenever that is. 20 some years ago. And so now there's a Big Four, but and there's a book called Treasure Islands by another British researcher and academic author,
Nicholas
Shaxson, who tax havens and the men who stole the world. And you can read that about, and that's from like 2011, about how these companies wrote the rules that the international tax haven system and the corporate non-accountability works on. They wrote the policies for the government. They wrote the charters for these offshore British sovereign territories and whatnot, and the onshore, offshore havens in places like Delaware and Luxembourg, and then they walk these companies through how to use the structure that they themselves set up. But it's like the people who did that back in the day were highly competent, but they've been succeeded by, like I said, these overgrown teenagers who think that this is just how the world has to work and it's all there for us and we do what we want. And every so often they get a slap in the face like this, and a few of them, have to walk the plank so that something can be seen to be being done about this corruption, but then it just rolls on because governments let it.
Another excellent book is Bean Counters. I can't remember the name of the author right now, but maybe we can put that up on the screen. But yeah, they point out in these various authors and activists that these were the agencies that gave clean bills of health to the likes of Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers and Northern Rock.
And of course Enron.
Pre-2008 crisis. And every major financial crisis, or ahead of every major financial crisis, it's these guys that have signed off on illegal activities, fraudulent accounting, aka Enron and so forth, in the banking system. And that's why we called for it to be changed in 2019. We wrote legislation which was put up in Parliament by Federal MP Bob Katter, and that bill addressed this kind of corruption from the standpoint of addressing the systemic risk in the financial system. It would have replaced the Big Four with the Government Auditor General's Office, which was designed to do such functions.
I mean, at least in the case of the other Big Four, the banks.
The banks,
not
exactly. Because the Big Four banks have an implicit government guarantee, and at that time we were pointing to the major systemic risks that were afoot. And at the time, there was a parliamentary joint inquiry that was going on by that same committee today, Corporations and Financial Services, that's investigating KPMG. And at that time, they were looking at corruption of auditing, and a number of expert submissions at that time called for the Big Four to be broken up. But yeah, as I mentioned, this auditing complex, this blob, has a huge impact on government policy, not only through the auditing and consulting contracts, giving advice and so forth, but with the outsourcing where so many, I mean, in some cases, 2/3 of some government departments in Australia are run, in terms of the staffing, by contractors from consulting firms.
And as usual, Albanese came in saying, oh yeah, we're going to sort this out, we're going to restore the public service and stop this government by consultant. And no, they didn't. They just expanded it again. And those PwC inquiry reports, the second one particularly, the one the government completely ignored, they noted, no they didn't, but both of them called for audit to be separated from, in other words, break up at least that function out, because have audit operationally separate from the rest of their business.
Yeah, it has to be.
It can be co-owned, but it has to be separate. No Chinese walls, as it should be called Japanese, the paper, tar paper walls. And for them to be banned from doing non-audit work for their audit clients. In other words, if you audit Westpac Bank, you don't provide tax policy advice to Westpac Bank, for example. And I'm singling out Westpac because it's been mentioned a lot in connection with this, both because its documents have been involved in the scandal and because there's a former KPMG partner who is on the board of Westpac and hired them as its auditor.
Right, yeah. So they can't be spying on the companies they're auditing in order to, win themselves their lucrative contracts for consulting. Now, I wanted to talk a bit more about what happened in the United Kingdom, because as I said, we were working with Professor Prem Sikka and we were taking the lead of similar inquiries and investigations that were going on over there. And I just wanted to cite former UK tax inspector Richard Brooks, who was interviewed by ABC in July 2018, around this same time that we were pushing for these alternatives circa 2019. He said, "There's no major policy change without the Big Four involved. Major infrastructure investment, transport policy, nuclear policy, almost everything you can think of is being driven by advice from the Big Four accountancy firms." As I said, it's them who are in the offices, they populate the public service, they're giving advice to government departments, it's all them. And this was exposed in an incredible report written in December 2018 in the UK, of which Professor Prem Sikka was the lead author, working with a team of experts. It was called Reforming the Auditing Industry. And Prem Sikka had given similar advice even prior to that within British parliamentary inquiries, particularly because he was an expert and had studied very closely the collapse of big firms like the construction company Carillion, which had a myriad of large government contracts in the same way, managing government functions instead of actually having public servants doing it. And this report showed that the Big Four companies, the same four companies, were more influential and pervasive in their criminality than even the Big Four banks, or in our case, Big Four banks, but the big banks in any case in any nation. They protected corporate predatory practices. They designed and oversaw the world's tax avoidance and evasion infrastructure, robbing governments of trillions of dollars. If you want to talk about why big corporations in Australia, whether it be the gas cartels or whether it be the tech companies, aren't paying tax, that's money not coming into our coffers, and they are allowed and facilitated to do it and protected in doing it by these Big Four auditing consulting firms.
And then the sort of, I guess you'd say, irony of it, another big reason, apart from just, hiving off accountability by the government by hiring these consultants to do all this policy work, is that then they can turn around and invoke their own version of legal professional privilege. They call it commercial in confidence, and refuse to disclose things via freedom of information requests or even to the Senate. Because the only person who can refuse to disclose things to the Senate, the only people who can do that legally are the executive government, and they do it all the time. Oh no, that's commercial in confidence. That would compromise, proprietary information of the contractors who provided these services. Yeah, why do you think they do it?
Yeah, exactly. And that report called for the creation of a statutory auditor backed by the government. Again, exactly what we called for in our bill, already using our already existent government auditor general. Right, that's enough for that topic. And before we've got a couple of really excellent updates. Stay tuned for that. But here's how you can get more involved.
You deserve a future where the people, not entrenched power, determines Australia's direction. That's why you should join the Citizens Party. You need post offices and regional bank branches to remain open. A government that invests in people, not submarines that will never arrive. And a foreign policy that's in our national interest. We've stopped the cash ban legislation and led the fight to hold major banks to account. Tens of thousands of Australians have signed our petitions, and it's made a real difference. It's time for action as we push towards our goal of 10,000 members. Join the Citizens Party at citizensparty.org.au and be part of the movement that's shaping Australia's future.
Timeline shows Dan Duggan was a pawn in AUKUS deal. So we put out an email alert this week, which we've talked about this from a number of angles over the years, but it's become very, very crystal clear now that Dan Duggan, the test flight pilot who has been accused of training or handing American technologies to China by training Chinese pilots in South Africa, You know, there's no truth behind those allegations at all.
Yeah. And it wouldn't matter if there were, because they weren't illegal here. And
no, he was licensed to do what he was doing by the Australian government. I mean, we've covered that a lot, but what I wanted to go through a little bit more in today's update is the timeline of the process that occurred, because it becomes really obvious, as the headline says, that Dan Duggan was a sacrificial lamb for Australia to demonstrate to America, to our dangerous allies, that we're good enough, we're loyal enough to be involved in this AUKUS deal.
Yeah, we'll shaft anyone you say.
Yeah.
We'll do it ourselves and offer this guy to you just because.
So on the 19th of October 2022, 2 days before Dan Duggan was arrested at the request of the United States, our Defence Minister Richard Marles came out with this statement where he said he was deeply shocked by reports of Australians training Chinese pilots. And at the time, Marles was involved in the secret negotiations for AUKUS.
The dud deal of the century.
Yeah. So then 2 days later, Dan Duggan was arrested in the supermarket after he dropped the kids off at school for these charges that had occurred 10 years earlier. A few months later, in San Diego, you've all seen the picture, we can put it up there, Australia, the UK and the US signed a deal for Australia, this is where Keating said we're the only ones paying, to buy 3 Virginia-class nuclear subs from the United States and jointly develop the Snorkus subs,
Snorkus.
as they become known, with the UK. Now, little over, or a bit less than a year later, in September 2023, there was a hearing of the US Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. And I'm going to show you a video which has some clips from that committee. What it demonstrated was that the Americans wanted assurances that people trying to steal American technology would not be able to get it via allies like Australia, right?
Yeah, because all of this nuclear propulsion technology these subs are based on, the Brits or the Americans, it's all American stuff that they've allowed the British to have, and now they're saying, well, we'll give you a look in on it as well.
And what did Australia do to reassure the United States? They handed over Dan Duggan. So you're going to see the admission of this. You have to connect the dots, but it's quite obvious when you know the case well, as we do, what's going on here in this interchange that took place in the Senate hearing. And this video is interspersed with the remarks where Robert Barwick, the chairman of the Australian Citizens Party, gave testimony to the AUKUS public inquiry. So he references it, and then you'll see interspersed the video clip from that US Senate hearing.
Because we have our laws in place, we're actually able to prosecute those who are training the Chinese pilots. And while I was in Australia, I did learn that an Australian pilot also participated, and we're looking to extradite that pilot here under our laws.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity, and thank you to the commissioners for your effort, your unpaid effort. This inquiry is well overdue. I'm Robert Barwick. I'm the chairman of the Australian Citizens Party. And what I'm going to speak about is something that we've had a lot of experience in. Assuming this inquiry concludes that AUKUS is a disaster, as you've heard pretty consistently today, I would urge you to consider that it is the product of an act of foreign interference in Australia. We've heard consistent testimony here today about what a disastrous deal this is. How did it come about? You need to look at the United States itself engineering public opinion in Australia to make this come about. I want to say one more thing just briefly. AUKUS is already having a human toll already. And that is, there are 6 children in New South Wales, including going down to the age of 10, and their mother, whose father and husband has been in prison for 3 years and 6 months in Australia. He's never been charged with any crime in Australia. He's never committed any crime in Australia. His name is Dan Duggan. This is his hat, Free Dan Duggan. Dan Duggan trained Chinese pilots in South Africa in 2012 for a few months, at a time when Australia was conducting joint military exercises with China, at a time when the United States was asking Australia if it could also get involved in conducting joint military exercises with China. There was no overtones of anything to do with war with China in those days. Ex-military people do this kind of thing all the time. He was indicted in 2017 by the United States, the new Trump administration. He was arrested by Australia in 2022. He's been in an Australian jail ever since, 3 years and 6 months. 19 months of that was in solitary confinement. The reason I'm raising this in the context of AUKUS is because in September 2023, there was a US hearing of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and the cranky, very old congressman, they were concerned about AUKUS and whether Australia is trustworthy to guard basically America's technology. And in justifying that we were, the US government officials, in justifying that we were, cited the case of the Australian government's treatment of Dan Duggan as if that was Australia showing an act of good faith to the Americans that we are trustworthy with their AUKUS technology.
If we lower our comparability standards for Australia and the UK significantly, which of course, as Senator Risch has pointed out, they're very, very long-term, reliable allies. I get that. What do we do when other partners tell us that they inevitably want the same lower standards? And they will be not insignificant allies as well in terms of their long-term relationship with us. Shouldn't we use this opportunity to leverage enhanced allied export controls so that we are protecting our own vital taxpayer-funded military technology?
Sir, I think you're absolutely right. As we work very hard to increase and make the system work so that we can create these kinds of alliances and partnerships where we're providing our most sensitive, highly lethal defense articles to other countries, we want everybody to have the best possible standards. Let me give you an example. This isn't specific to Australia or the UK, but let me give you an example of the kinds of things that we could be concerned about. For example, we've recently seen some Chinese pilots getting training from other countries, including pilots here in the US. We need to be able to prosecute those. We want our partners and allies to be able to do the same. We want to make sure that if a country is trying to acquire a particular technology, it can't get around the system by going into a place where there's more room in their export controls. And I think that, to me, it's common sense to work together to bring all of us to similar standards. And I would say it's not just to protect our companies and the IP that they produce, but fundamentally it's to protect our warfighter. Because if these technologies are exploited and used against our warfighter, we're also putting them in danger. And we take that responsibility very seriously.
Well, first of all, let me say that my experience in talking with them, both the Australians and the Brits, is the same as yours. It's incredibly positive. Certainly, you don't always agree on everything, but everyone's rolling up their sleeves and committed to get this done and to reach the middle ground we need to get there. It's a little ironic that we are beating the drum about higher or different regulatory changes when, in fact, we're the ones that have actually been the victim of Chinese thefts and espionage and what have you, whereas I'm not aware of any of publicly reported instances of the same thing happening to the Australians or the Brits. Is that an accurate statement?
Let me share what I'm aware of. I actually think because we have our laws in place, we're actually able to prosecute the Chinese, those who are training the Chinese pilots. And while I was in Australia, I did learn that an Australian pilot also participated, and we're looking to extradite that pilot here under our laws to deal with that issue.
He was arrested by Australia in 2022. He's been in an Australian jail ever since, 3 years and 6 months. 19 months of that was in solitary confinement. Our government has approved his extradition to the United States. Now, to qualify for extradition, you have to meet what's the requirement, what's called dual criminality. What you're accused of by a foreign country must be a crime in this country. To meet that requirement, our government applied a 2018 law retrospectively to what he was accused of doing in 2012. He's got no prospect of getting out. He's probably going to be shipped off to the United States to face 65 years in prison for what they're accusing him of doing, scapegoating him. And our government seems to have sacrificed this guy because of this deal. Thank you.
Okay, so, there you can see that Jessica Lewis, Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, raising Dan Duggan and literally saying that she found out about this while she was in Australia. Did the US know about this case? Did Australia raise him and just say, yeah, here's a lamb we can send to slaughter to get this job done?
Yep.
There's a lot of questions raised by that.
Yeah. Well, and remember, the indictment was 5 years old and nobody had bothered to act on it until that point.
Yeah. Well, as we say in our email statement, which we'll link below, the Australian government actually had to reverse engineer a case that would allow for Dan Duggan's extradition because it didn't fit and still doesn't fit even with that reverse engineering, the bill for extradition.
Had to retrospectively or allow the interpretation that laws here cannot be retrospective unless they're stated to be so, right? It's a bedrock of the legal system, right? Yeah. Otherwise, they could ban something today that everybody was doing yesterday and lock up whoever they wanted to, right? There are very, very limited cases in which things can legitimately be made retrospective, and this sure isn't one of them. Yeah. But it's not only that, the wording of this 2018 law, this bit that they've stuck in there about, training foreign, potential adversaries, whatever it says in these, this and this, it uses American military jargon in that law that Australia and the British Commonwealth forces don't use. So who do you think wrote that for them and they just copied and pasted it in, Yeah.
So this has huge implications, and a victory to free Dan Duggan would have huge implications in helping to get the leverage to defeat AUKUS. So contact your MPs about this matter, and if you can, please help the family. We'll put up the link, freedanduggan.org, because, his wife and 6 kids are in real trouble here and battling this against all odds. Now, we've got a quick update on the ASIO bill and when it's coming up in the Parliament. Stay tuned, but here's how you can find out more by getting the alert.
The narrow agendas of mainstream media outlets are not telling you the full story. The weekly Citizens Party Australian Alert provides in-depth insights into issues that matter to all Australians. The Australian Alert holds a mirror to those in the halls of power, reporting on issues of national importance that are being buried by the major parties. It's reported on the misconduct of banks and major corporates, the persecution of those doing their jobs, and the failure of regulators to do theirs. Economic coverage puts real issues on the political agenda. There's serious analysis of global issues, the Washington Insiders report, and the global threat from endless wars. Everything you should know every week is in the Australian Alert. Subscribe today for hard copy and digital versions.
Wilkie warns against ASIO overreach. Now, just a quick update on the ASIO bill. The power, giving ASIO the permanent powers with no sunsetting and so forth to pull people off the street as young as 14, although there were concessions such as the government agreeing to leave the sunset clause in. So when it comes up, whenever it comes up,
another 3 years.
That's something we've already, won the fight for, to keep the sunset clause in there through our campaigns. And it looks like today's Thursday. The Parliament doesn't usually sit on Fridays, so if it doesn't come up today, it'll be next week that it may or may not, it could arise next week. Today it looks like the Senate will be busy with the final getting through the tax reforms in the budget.
Tax and the budget bills,
So according to the notice papers and so forth, it looks like that'll be the major issue today. So we're still in the fight for that, and keep hounding the politicians about it. We just need to keep the pressure on it till it comes up, and the more time we've got to do that, the better. But I wanted to point you to an excellent interview, which you can see. This is the program up on the screen called "The Intelligent State: Where Are the Limits?" where Andrew Wilkie, who of course has a stellar record on fighting government overreach when it comes to security matters, as we know with the Iraq War and the fact that he resigned from his role.
In the peak intelligence agency, the Office of National Assessments, that reports direct to the Prime Minister.
To protest the...
now ONI, National Intelligence, but same organisation, just expanded now.
So he did that to protest the lies on the weapons of mass destruction. So he has real credibility in this area. And he says in this interview, he talks about how legislation is often rushed through without debate all the time in Parliament, and it can't be done on something like this. He said, look, I'm the first one to stand up for national security, but, and this is a quote, but not like this. This is overreach, and politicians need to push back against the wishes of the security services. He demanded the sunset clause be kept and that ASIO should require a warrant from a judge, not just from the Attorney General. So along the same lines as what we've been demanding. But I want to play you this clip because it's very interesting. He talks about how intelligence agencies can, quote, intoxicate politicians.
And I've seen this as an outsider in the political sphere. I've seen it as an insider when I used to work in the intelligence community. It's very easy to almost intoxicate a politician and bring them into the tent. Politicians normally aren't familiar with the world of intelligence and spies and classified material and documents with secret written on top. It's too easy for the intelligence services to almost to cultivate and recruit a politician and get them on side. Now this isn't a criticism, by the way, of our current Attorney General or our current head of ASIO or any other of our total of 6 intelligence agencies. Actually, this is not a criticism of them. It's just a fact of life. The head of an agency like ASIO sits the Attorney General down and says, "Look, we've got a real grave concern about this person," and pulls out a secret assessment. With all sorts of letters and words at the top and bottom of the page. It's quite intoxicating. And it's very easy to persuade a lawmaker to agree to what they want. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but the world of intelligence, it's quite an intoxicating, interesting environment.
Yeah, so that's rather interesting how he says, these intelligence agencies know how to get the politicians on the hook and then they just pull.
Yeah.
They got them.
It's, and this is, people should bear in mind, this is the most qualified person in Parliament to talk about this stuff, possibly ever, certainly at the moment. Right? A veteran professional intelligence officer with actual moral integrity,
That's right.
But in a sense, even if you think nothing but the best of ASIO, like Paul Keating said, and again, everybody knows we have our issues, many of them with Paul Keating, but on this type of stuff, he tends to be, pretty spot on. But putting ASIO in charge of policy is like putting the lunatics in charge of the asylum, because It's their job to be paranoid about everything. That's what they're for, to look at everything with suspicion and see, oh, is that a danger, is that a danger, is that a danger? It's the government's job to tell them what to focus on. It's the government's job to make policy and to take, to listen to their advice, but you don't have to take their word for everything, and you certainly don't put them in charge of making policy.
No.
Right? That's not their job. Even if you trusted them to do their job properly, which I don't know why you would, but people do. But even in that case, these people, by the nature of their work and thus the kinds of mindset of people that they hire, cannot be allowed to be put in charge of policy.
Yeah.
It's just not how things should be done.
Yeah. Yeah, we need more politicians with the perspective that Wilkie has, and we'll put a link below to that video and you can circulate it, you can send it to politicians, just keep intervening in any way you can. That's all the time we've got this week. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Elisa.
Follow the links below to find out more and join us again next week.